You wake to the rustle of brocade. Not yours, of course. You're merely a guest in this peculiar salon of 17th century France, where powdered wigs teeter like cupcakes, and men wear more lace than an entire bridal shop. The curtains are silk, the furniture squeaks with uncomfortable opulence, and somewhere in the distance, a violin sighs with the exhaustion of playing minuets for hours on end. Your host is late, but no one seems concerned. Everyone in this drawing room is preoccupied with pets. One woman coos at a hedgehog in a tiny bonnet. A gentleman offers grapes to a highly suspicious squirrel. And most bizarre of all, you spot a noblewoman gently adjusting the velvet leash of what can only be described as a small, glistening crayfish. Yes, a crayfish. Leashed, pampered, wearing, you swear, the tiniest collar made of pearls. Welcome to the curious footnote of French aristocratic history, when nobles, somewhere between powdered snuff and petty revolutions, took it upon themselves to adopt freshwater crustaceans as fashionable companions. You probably won't make it through this day without raising an eyebrow. So please, breathe in, relax, sip something soothing if you've got it. And before we descend into this mildly absurd history, remember to like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. Bonus points if you've ever considered dressing a shrimp. Now let's ease into tonight's journey.
You begin your morning not with toast, but with a viewing of the noble Crayfish promenade. It takes place precisely at the 10th chime of the salon's ormolu clock, which is shaped like Apollo and entirely too proud of itself. A silver tray is brought out, not for tea, but for transportation. Upon it, 4 crayfish, each resting on embroidered cushions shaped like lily pads. Their leashes are made of silk floss, dyed in delicate pastels. One is pale rose, another periwinkle. You note one especially fashionable crustacean wears what appears to be a feathered hat. You blink. No, it's just part of a wilted leaf. Still, stylish. These are the pets of Madame Célestine de Rochemort, heiress to a vast collection of very small mirrors and the dubious title of Crayfish Patroness of Paris. She lifts one gently, cooing, Mon goût bijou, which you're fairly sure translates to, my sweet jewel, though it might just mean, you slippery little treasure. The crayfish, for its part, remains motionless, dignified, possibly napping. Now you may be wondering, was this common? Well, no. But in the strange corners of 17th and 18th century French high society, it wasn't unheard of. Aristocrats often tried to outdo one another, not just with opulence, but with absurd novelty. Parrots that recited Baudelaire, goldfish trained to flip themselves. And yes, crayfish on leashes. Some historians believe the trend began at Château de Clignancourt, a lesser-known estate famed not for politics or battle, but for its unusually well-stocked freshwater pond. According to one guest's diary, written in a surprisingly playful hand, the lady of the manor began tying silk threads to her crayfish to keep them from wandering too far during garden teas. What began as practical crustacean tethering turned inevitably into a social game. Guests began bringing their own. They compared shell color, tail length, claw daintiness. "I prefer mine with a little extra flourish at the antennae," one nobleman was heard to declare. Others formed impromptu races, though, as you can imagine, a crayfish race is about as thrilling as watching embroidery dry. Still, wages were made, prizes awarded, honor fiercely defended. The crayfish themselves? Well, they were fed bits of brioche and occasionally spritzed with rose water to keep their spirits up. Whether their spirits were ever high to begin with is something scholars still debate. One 1734 pamphlet even proposed standardized crayfish etiquette. Always announce your crayfish before entering a salon. Never let it cross another's leash without apology. Under no circumstances should two crayfish be left unsupervised near a punch bowl. It's worth noting that much of this was likely performed with tongue very much in powdered cheek. Satirical portraits survive, paintings of powdered nobles bowing to their crustacean companions with mock seriousness. Still, some took it very seriously. Madame Celestine, for example, insisted her crayfish preferred Vivaldi over Couperin, and once stormed out from a garden party when someone referred to her beloved Aquilone as a shrimp. You begin to sense that, much like human fashion, crayfish companionship was less about the animal and more about the statement. I am whimsical. I am rich. I am profoundly bored. And I have a leash long enough to prove it. You wander back to your guest chamber, which now contains a small bowl and an envelope labeled "For your own crustacean endeavors." Inside is a single thread of gold silk. No pressure. But apparently, you've been accepted into the club.
Your crayfish arrives in a tiny velvet pouch. It's hard to say how it was delivered. No one knocked, no bells rang. It was simply there, resting on your silk pillow, as if it had always been a part of the room's decor. The creature blinks at you once, indifferently, before retreating slightly into the pouch like a celebrity avoiding an interview. Tied to its shell is a folded card, gold-inked. Your attendance is requested this afternoon at the Salon de Couture Aquatique. Dress your companion accordingly. A modest hat is encouraged. M. de Rochemort. You stare at the card, then at the crayfish. It blinks again. What follows is perhaps the most delicate fitting of your life. You are guided to a dressing chamber, not for you, of course, but for your companion. Inside, rows of impossibly small garments arranged with obsessive care. Tiny cravats, petite frock coats, miniature epaulettes, even a muff, for reasons unknown. Crayfish lack hands. A valet with a monocle offers suggestions in hushed tones. This one brings out the shimmer in the carapace, monsieur. You select a tasteful waistcoat with gold trim and a matching tricorn hat fashioned from a curled leaf and silk fringe. The valet nods. Très élégant. Somewhere deep in Versailles, or a salon styled to evoke its glory, noble men and women gather with their clawed companions in tow. Some arrive in tiny wagons. Others ride in walnut-shell sledges pulled by particularly confused mice. You are ushered into the room with appropriate reverence. Your crayfish is gently placed upon a lace-covered pedestal alongside the others. A hush falls as Madame Celestine claps twice. Let the parade begin. Crayfish are introduced by name and origin. Marquis de Clavier of the Champagne Springs. Lady Bubbeline of the Southern Grotto. Count Pinchard, retainer to the Duchess of Dijon. Your crayfish is announced simply as a visitor's curiosity. It seems to approve of the mystery. Judging begins. Criteria? No one's entirely sure. Elegance, posture, the gleam of the carapace, the coordination of antennae, perhaps? Your companion holds its own, sways gently, makes eye contact with a rival crustacean, and does not blink. Scandalous. Between rounds, nobles sip elderflower tea and speculate about which crayfish might be secretly courting. One gossip insists 2 crayfish were recently seen exchanging breadcrumbs in a moonlit fountain. You lean down and whisper to your new friend, "You're doing beautifully." It doesn't respond,
but somehow you think it knows. The winner is announced. Aquilon. Again. There are polite claps, someone coughs dramatically, a crayfish flips its tail in what could be either applause or irritation. You take your leave with your crayfish tucked gently back in its pouch. You didn't win, but your companion now carries itself with unmistakable pride. And you've learned how to dress a crustacean. Something no one can ever take from you.
The morning finds you in the conservatory, sipping something citrusy and possibly medicinal, though the monks who brewed it refused to explain what was in it beyond sun-dried optimism. Your crayfish companion, now affectionately named M. Pinch, short for Monsieur Pinchy but with a touch more dignity, lounges beside you in a shallow porcelain dish lined with moss and scattered lavender sprigs. Today, you're invited, no, summoned to meet the Royal Crayfish Whisperer, a role that sounds fabricated but is in fact very real. A salaried position, with robes and a staff. The man himself, Monsieur Edouard Chanterelle, arrives not with fanfare, but with a faint scent of lemon balm and the quiet confidence of someone who spent far too much time listening to aquatic creatures. He carries a small book bound in eelskin and bows slightly before M. Pinch. "I sense an old soul," he says gravely. You're not sure if he means the crayfish or you. You nod anyway. Chanterelle gestures toward a low table covered in hand-painted cards, tiny instruments, and a bowl of spring water so pristine you suspect it has been filtered through metaphysical poetry. "We begin with temperament testing," he says. M. Pinch is placed gently before a card bearing the painted likeness of a snail. He moves away from it, slowly but deliberately. "Good," says Chanterelle. "Healthy skepticism of mollusks." Next comes a thimble-sized harp. The crayfish approaches it and taps it with one claw, producing the faintest note. "Musical curiosity," he whispers, "a sign of latent poeticism." For the next hour, your crayfish is exposed to scents, bells, miniature paper fans, and one somewhat confusing puppet shaped like a duck. Notes are taken. Eventually, Chanterelle leans in with priestly solemnity. "This one," he intones, "is a companion of the second water, noble, observant, prone to dreams." He hands you a scroll with care instructions. Avoid sudden noises. Speak to him in gentle metaphors. Allow occasional moonlight reflection. Never, under any circumstances, mention lobsters. You thank him. M. Pinch seems to appreciate the formal diagnosis. Later, over lunch, rose petal salad with inexplicable violet jam, another guest leans in and asks, "Did he offer your crayfish a title?" You admit he did not. The guest looks mildly impressed. "Rare. Most aren't ready. That's a good sign." That afternoon, you catch M. Pinch gazing at his reflection in a spoon. And for a moment, just a moment, you wonder if he's wondering too. Not about status, but about water. About belonging. About the quiet lives creatures live while we bustle around inventing meaning. It's a sleepy thought. A lovely one. You let it drift through you like a slow ripple in a pond. And you wonder what Chanterelle would whisper about you, if given the chance. Afternoons are for lessons. Not yours, of course. You're merely an observer here. though your posture has improved slightly since watching that baron balance a teacup on his elbow while curtsying. Today's topic, crustacean etiquette. You find yourself seated in the library's blue room, where the walls are lined with nothing but books on manners, most of which were written by people who fainted if someone said fork too loudly. The instructor is a Madame Dubonnet, a woman so pale she seems preserved in marzipan, and whose voice never rises above the tone of a well-behaved yawn. Rule 1, she says, your crayfish does not nibble before introductions are made. Several nobles scribble furiously into notebooks shaped like fish. Rule 2, if one's crayfish becomes overexcited, it is customary to remove it to a quieting nook. These are small, velvet-lined boxes filled with calming herbs and tiny watercolor landscapes. Yours prefers the one with a windmill. Rule 3, never point with your crustacean. This apparently has happened more than once. As the lesson continues, a gentle chaos unfolds. One crayfish refuses to bow, another topples a sugar cube tower, a third begins clicking rhythmically in what might be protest or interpretive dance. And then, mid-lesson, a duchess faints. Not from scandal, but from the sheer effort of composing a haiku in honor of her crayfish while keeping her wig upright. The footmen carry her out gently, muttering about too much lavender syrup. Madame Dubonnet continues as if nothing happened. Rule 4, she intones, if your crayfish bites another's, you are to offer a written apology and a soft-boiled egg. You glance at M. Pince, who is deeply engrossed in rearranging rose petals. Later, during the tea break, guests trade stories. One baron claims his crayfish once stared down a cat. Another swears hers can predict rain. You nod politely and mention that M. Pince once chose the correct key 3 times in a row. They gasp in admiration. Well, someone murmurs, perhaps he's a weather reader. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds impressive. That evening, you catch a glimpse of your own reflection in the mirror, gently smiling, posture oddly regal, with a crayfish lounging beside you in what appears to be a dessert spoon. You wonder what your former self would think. And then you decide it doesn't matter. After all, you've memorized Rule 5. A noble never doubts a well-dressed crustacean. Night falls with the kind of softness usually reserved for pastries and lullabies. The moon hangs low like it's eavesdropping. And you? You're being fitted for a mask made of lace, moonbeams, and a single pearl, because tonight is the Crayfish Ball. Held once a season at the estate of the Comtesse de Fontaine-Lagarde, the event is legendary for its excess, its oddities, and its insistence that both guests and their crayfish attend in formal wear. Your invitation arrived rolled inside a hollow baguette, naturally. The ballroom is candlelit, gilded and echoing with the gentle clinks of glasses and shells. Harpsichords play music composed exclusively for beings with no ears. The chandeliers are shaped like upside-down coral reefs. No one comments on this. Crayfish arrive in carriages, on velvet pillows, or in hollowed-out fruit. One dramatic duchess wears a crayfish tiara and insists it is also her cousin twice removed. The opening procession is slow, intentionally. Pairs glide across the floor, each noble accompanied by their shelled counterpart. Some hold their crayfish like dance cards, others let them crawl daintily on ribboned leashes across their sleeves. You and Monsieur Pants opt for a modest entrance, choosing to ride in on a floral boat pushed by a servant dressed as a lily pad. It's tasteful, understated, respected. Dinner is served in courses. First, a consommé so delicate it evaporates upon compliments. Then a salad shaped like a swan reading a novel. Dessert? A meringue shaped like a smaller ballroom with edible guests. Crayfish are fed too, special herbs, petal jellies, crumb sculptures of Versailles. No one speaks of politics. Only which crayfish seems to be leading the best life. Yours, Monsieur Pants, is introduced to a certain Marquis de Glouglou, a striking creature with one golden claw and a reputation for biting dukes. There is undeniable chemistry. A slow dance begins. Your crayfish twirls, pivots slowly in a wide arc, antennae grazing hers. The room sighs. This is the pinnacle. Later, as the candles dim and the nobles retreat to their carriages and velvet poufs, you find Monsieur Pants resting on your lap, blissfully asleep. He smells faintly of rosemary and confidence. You carry him back through the halls under the stars, and you think. Of all the strange things you've seen, this may be the strangest, and somehow the most peaceful.
You wake to the sound of paper, soft, crisp, turning itself, like leaves gossiping. Today your guide is a footman who whispers rather than speaks and walks like he's afraid to wake the floor. He leads you down a winding staircase, through a hallway lined with portraits of animals in judicial robes, and into a quiet chamber marked with a small brass plaque. La Bibliothèque des Crustacés, the Crustacean Library. You've heard rumors, whispers between nobles, the occasional toast made in its honor, but no one has described it fully. Until now. The room is smaller than expected, just 3 circular walls wrapped in bookshelves that go no higher than your chin. All the volumes are tiny, some no bigger than your thumb. There are chairs, yes, but also low tables designed for shell-based visitors. Crayfish, says the footman, write with ink made from blueberries and memory. You nod, as one does. Each crayfish of high breeding is apparently invited at some point to contribute one memory to the library. Not fact, not event, but memory. Yours, Monsieur Pants, is given a small desk, a soft feather, and a puddle of ink the color of midnight jam. He stares at the page, scratches once, then again, and again. He writes for nearly an hour. Meanwhile, you browse the shelves. Some titles catch your eye. A Shadow That Smelled of Time. The Pebble That Watched Me Sleep. How I Escaped the Spoon, briefly. Reflections on a Water Bucket, 1761 to 1763. Each page contains a single sentence. Some are poetic, some confusing, some heartbreakingly simple. You read one aloud. The hand that carried me was cold, but it hummed a soft tune. Your heart makes a soft, lemon-shaped ache. When Monsieur Pants finishes, his parchment is sealed with wax and stored in a box labeled Pants M, Visitor Class. You were given a ribbon, silver with a faint shimmer of pond mist. A mark of contribution, says the librarian. You tie it to your sleeve. You leave the library slowly. The air outside feels warmer, or maybe you just feel older. wiser. Or perhaps you've simply read too many sentences written by Claw. You look at Monsieur Pals. He blinks, and you understand. This journey isn't about fashion, or etiquette, or dancing. It's about being seen, remembered, even if just by a footman, a flower, or a page in a very, very quiet library.
Today, you don't wear shoes, not because of protocol, but because the grass of the spa gardens is rumored to hum beneath your feet. You're led gently, dreamily, through a trellis of flowering vines into the Crayfish Spa of St. Barnabé, a retreat hidden behind hedgerows and protected by two very old turtles who nod solemnly as you pass. Here, pampering is an art. Not for you, mind you, but for your shelled companion, who is immediately greeted by an attendant in a robe the color of melted butter and addressed as Monsieur. Monsieur Pince is whisked away in a walnut shell gondola filled with misted rose water and accompanied by the soft tapping of a bamboo xylophone. You are handed a cup of warm lemon blossom broth and asked to wait in the viewing pavilion. "Do not speak," says a monk-like figure, with a crayfish embroidered on his sash. "They must find their inner ripple first." You sit, sip, wait. In the courtyard below, you watch. There's a steam room made of moss and snail shells, a petal bath heated by candlelight, a tiny massage table where two attendants softly tap a crayfish's shell with warmed polished stones. The philosophy here is simple. Stillness reveals the truth of the soul, and also improves claw flexibility. One particularly elderly crayfish is treated to a sound bath, bells the size of earrings, rung gently, one note at a time. Monsieur Pince is offered a choice of scent. He selects rosemary over mint, but not without some antennae flickering first. The attendant bows. Wise choice. After treatments, all crayfish are taken to the reflection pond. There they float gently in a ring of calm, accompanied by the distant lull of harps and the occasional poem recited by a lark. Visitors are encouraged to leave behind something they've outgrown. You write yours on a stone with berry ink, the need to always understand everything, and toss it into the pond. The splash is barely audible, but somehow it echoes inside you. That evening, as Monsieur Pince is returned to you, his shell gleaming, posture elegant, mood serene, you swear he's carrying the kind of peace only spa days and ancient pond wisdom can provide. You don't speak, you just nod, and walk home barefoot, because honestly, the grass still hums a little. The invitation arrives wrapped in linen and scented faintly with bay leaf and humility. Tonight, you and your companion are cordially requested to attend the Tournament of Quiet Triumphs, a gathering not of strength, but of subtle skill, held in the moon-kissed groves behind the estate. You read the description aloud. An evening of minor feats, whispered competitions, and triumphs that make no noise. Perfect. You arrive just as the sun dips behind the cypress trees, painting everything in honey and hush. Lanterns swing from branches, lighting the field in golden dots like fireflies holding hands. The events are unconventional. There is the slowest crawl, in which crayfish compete to not move, with precision and grace. A single toe length may take the better part of an hour. There's antennae poetry, where tiny flags tied to antennae are used to spell emotions in semaphore.
One crayfish spells melancholy in spring. The crowd weeps softly. There's the leaf push, in which contestants gently nudge a curled leaf across a velvet track using only the wind from their claws. One noble is disqualified for sneezing. Your M-Pince is registered for the Stillness Cup. The rules are simple. Remain perfectly motionless on a lily pad while harpists play increasingly dramatic music. He is placed gently on the platform. A hush falls. The harpists begin. First, something dreamy, then a bit stormy, then one especially bold glissando that startles a nearby frog. M-Pince does not flinch. A judge leans in. Impressive still face. I've only seen that in 2 others. One of them was a statue. After 22 minutes and no fewer than 3 false flinches by other contestants, the bell rings. Victory. No cheers, just polite nods and a small flag waved by a sleepy child. Your prize? A thimble made of pearl and a haiku etched in bark. Stillness is louder than armies beneath the moon, your claw unmoving. You and M-Pince retire beneath a tree shaped like a comma, sipping elderflower mist and sharing the silence that only champions know. He doesn't need applause. He just needed the moment.
At precisely 1 yawn past midnight, a bell rings. Not a loud bell, more like a suggestion of a bell. The kind of sound you don't hear so much as remember. A folded card appears at your bedside tray alongside a cup of lavender milk. Tonight only, a lecture on crayfish philosophy by Candle and Moonlight in the Whispering Nook. Pajamas encouraged. You slip on your silkiest robe, the one embroidered with a pattern that might be clouds or sheep or abstract thoughts, depending on your mood. Monsieur Ponce is already awake. You suspect he never really sleeps, only meditates with his eyes closed. The Whispering Nook is not far, a circular glade wrapped in ivy, with cushions scattered like thoughts that settled. A single candle burns in the center. Your lecturer is a philosopher of indeterminate age and soft slippers, Professor Lavoliere, who once taught both theology and basket weaving at a monastery no one remembers. He opens a tiny scroll and begins. Crayfish do not wonder what comes next. They do not check sundials. They are always precisely where they are meant to be, sideways and unhurried. The audience, a few nobles, 1 badger in a kerchief, and a choir of politely nodding crustaceans listens in respectful stillness. Professor Lavoliere continues. Crayfish teach us to move sideways through worry, to pause under rocks when necessary, to decorate one's shell, but never to wear it too tightly. You write this down. M. Ponce is seemed especially moved by the passage on decorative autonomy. A hand is raised, the Marquis of Snailbrook, who is known for asking questions that answer themselves. But what, he asks, do crayfish believe about the stars? The professor smiles as if he's been waiting for this. They don't believe in the stars. They taste them in the current. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the nook. A crayfish flicks its tail in soft applause. The lecture ends with a quote attributed to an anonymous shell philosopher. To be small and still and seen, that is the only truth worth molting for. You walk back to your room in contemplative silence. The candlelight stays in your mind long after the wick fades. You glance at Monsieur Ponce, nestled in his linen pouch, like a monk who found peace at the bottom of a teacup. You wonder, if you too moved sideways through time, would you find more joy? Or maybe, like the crayfish, you'd simply find now. And that would be enough.
The rain today is whisper soft, more like a drizzle of lace than water. You would hardly know it's raining unless you were watching the roses nod. But your schedule is unaffected. Today's destination, the Museum of Utterly Useless Crayfish Artifacts. Located just beyond the orchard, housed in a former biscuit storage cellar, it is curated by Madame Isabeau Duplink, a woman whose monocle has a monocle and whose passion for nonsense is unmatched. She greets you in a gown shaped like a question mark. "We begin," she says, "in the department of decorative items with no known purpose." You pass velvet-lined glass cases. Inside them, a gold-encrusted crayfish saddle. Too small for any known crayfish, possibly ceremonial, possibly a prank. A pair of spats, tiny leg garments stitched from plum skin labeled "worn once, discarded immediately." A flute shaped like a crawdad but playable only by the wind. It makes a sound like a confused sigh. Anne Pince observes everything with academic detachment. In the Hall of Failed Inventions, you find the aqua ascot, a cravat designed to float. Did not, sank immediately. A crayfish treadmill, no further notes. The polite claw ring, meant to restrain impolite gestures, banned after one duel. Madame Duplink leads you next to the archives of overinterpretation, where scholars once debated whether a crumb found in a crayfish's possession indicated religious belief. One exhibit is simply titled Shrine or Picnic. The museum's pièce de résistance? A portrait, oil on oyster shell, of the infamous Count de Crayfish, who claimed to be half crayfish, half dream. He's depicted reclining on a chaise longue, sipping pond water through a tulip, wearing only a monocle and a philosophical expression. Madame Duplink clears her throat. Some say the Count was mad. She gestures around at the exhibits. Others say he was early. In the final room, you're invited to submit an artifact of your visit. You leave behind a spoon. No reason, just a feeling. M. Pince leaves a single antenna tap on a marble slab. The docent whispers, "That will be interpreted for decades." You leave full of useless knowledge, which is to say, joy. Because really, what better kind is there?
It begins, as all important things do, with a hat. Specifically, a wide-brimmed surveying hat made of linen, tied under your chin with a ribbon and decorated with a feather that seems undecided about its loyalties. Today, you are a census taker, one of a handful of invited guests asked to assist with the decennial crayfish count in the sleepy, half-evaporated village of Forgotten Springs. You are assigned Region 3, Fern Grotto, Moss Corner, and the occasional sentient fountain, which may or may not be allowed to vote depending on rainfall. Your official clipboard is made of pressed daisies and comes with a single pre-sharpened goose quill. Your guide, a former crayfish turned translator named Jean-Claude. He wears a bell. The goal is simple. Determine how many noble, dignified crayfish reside in the springs, note their preferred poetry style, and ask if they'd like to be included in the annual Almanac of Quiet Personalities. The challenge? They don't live in straight lines. They live in spirals and dreams. The first is Madame Sheila, a Claude philosopher who lives in a hollow acorn and refuses to be counted unless you first answer her riddle. What walks sideways, thinks in circles, and hides its best jokes in mud? You hesitate. M. Pince taps your quill. You write, all of us, eventually. She bows. You record her name. Next is Frère Rousseau, a monk who communicates solely in ripple patterns. He blesses you with a splash and offers you a single pond pebble, which you're told means welcome or possibly leave faster. The most surprising encounter? A self-declared mayor, Don Jacques de Bubble. He emerges from beneath a lily pad wearing a sash made of soaked ribbon and insists you try his cheese. You politely nibble a moss cracker. It tastes like ambition and algae. You record 47 residents, 12 undecideds, and one that may be a rock with delusions of grandeur. At the final checkpoint, you're asked to describe the overall emotional tone of your region. You pause, then write, mildly philosophical with hints of damp contentment. A good answer. The sun sets with barely a sigh, and you turn in your report to a sleepy official who stores it in a drawer shaped like a seashell. You're given a commemorative badge, a pin of a crayfish holding a scroll and a small biscuit. Wear it when you wish to feel official, says the attendant. You and M. Pince walk home slowly, watching the sky begin to write its own census in stars. You feel counted. And more than that, appreciated. Even if just by a crayfish named Jean-Claude and a riddle-telling acorn hermit.
There are certain mornings when the mist forgets to lift. This is one of them. The air is thick with softness, as though the clouds have come down to nap in the hedgerows. Even the teacups seem to move more slowly, their saucers sighing beneath them. You and M. Pince are scheduled for a visit to the Chamber of Gentle Forecasts, a circular pavilion built entirely of glass and goose feathers. It's where dreams are interpreted, not yours, but your crayfish's. Because, as the proverb goes, when a crayfish dreams of rain, a poet wakes with a wet shoe. You're greeted at the entrance by Madame Mistral, a dream reader whose shawl appears to be woven from fog and who smells faintly of cardamom and forgotten lullabies. Your companion has slept deeply, she says. I can feel it in the ripple lines. M. Pince is placed in the dream bowl, a shallow basin filled with moon-distilled water, wild mint, and a single opal for focus. You are invited to sit nearby and hum softly. The humming, she explains, helps keep the dream tethered. You choose a melody that sounds like something your grandmother once whispered to her bread dough. Madame Mistral places her fingertips into the water and listens. Truly listens. Eyes closed, face serene. After some time, she speaks. He dreams of spirals, of dancing leaves, of a very polite duel with a spoon. You nod. This checks out. There is a tall hill with a puddle shaped like a question mark. He wants to return there for closure. You make a mental note. And finally, she says with a smile, he is wondering whether you trust him yet. You pause, then reach over and gently touch his shell. The answer, unspoken, is yes. As a token of clarity, Madame Mistral presents you with a folded scroll. Inside, predictions written in the looping script of someone who has absolutely no urgency. Tomorrow will arrive late. Something blue
will be important. Avoid making large decisions near fish. You tuck it into your sleeve. Outside, the mist begins to lift, just a little. You and M. Pince walk home without speaking, not out of solemnity, but because some dreams don't need translating. They just need carrying. The invitation arrives wrapped in seaweed paper, sealed with what appears to be a dab of almond butter. The Society of Retired Crayfish requests your respectful presence and possibly your storytelling skills. Curious? Certainly. Confused? Absolutely. You and M. Pince arrive just after tea time, greeted at the gate by a dapper elderly crayfish named Sir Muddleclaw, whose monocle appears to be held on by sheer dignity. "This way," he says, in a voice like damp velvet. The Society's grounds resemble a library that decided to become a garden halfway through construction. Ivy-laced walkways curl around pools of still water, and hammocks hang low between bookshelves. Everything smells faintly of ink and chamomile. "This is where distinguished crayfish retire," Sir Muddleclaw explains, "after a lifetime of dance, diplomacy, or interpretive stillness." You're ushered into the Hall of Reflections, where each crayfish is paired with a human memoirist, someone tasked with transcribing their tales into a respectable, if meandering, volume. Some memoirists sit at typewriters, others whisper into seashell dictaphones. You're assigned to Madame Carapace, an elegant elder with an impeccable shell and a fondness for dramatic pauses. She communicates by claw gesture, subtle ripples, and the occasional thunk. With M. Pince nestled nearby, you begin your work. "Chapter 1, you whisper, as she poses beneath a vine. "The day I realized the bubble was not my enemy." Her stories come slowly, like fog pouring from a teacup. A flirtation with a diplomat's fern. A scandal involving a duel over shared algae. A moment of personal growth during a thunderstorm in 1768. You write it all down, including her tangents about the superiority of moss over sand, and her firm belief that spoons carry secrets. M. Pince listens intently. Occasionally he nods. When you finish, Sir Muddleclaw hands you a ribbon for services to shelled literature. You feel strangely honored. As the sun droops low behind the gazebo, the memoirists gather for the nightly ritual, reading one sentence aloud. Tonight's chosen line: "Even small ripples can startle the moon." A hush falls. Then soft clapping, very soft, mostly antenna. You and M. Pince return home beneath the stars. He seems thoughtful. You feel oddly proud, like you've helped carry something fragile and peculiar across a very slow-moving sea. The air smells of marjoram and stories. It is the final night of the season, marked by the long-awaited festival of the soft shell, when crayfish who have recently molted are celebrated not for their perfection, but for their vulnerability. Everyone wears something unfinished: unhemmed sleeves, a single glove, hats that look surprised to be hats. Even the orchestra is slightly off-tempo, by choice. You and M. Pince arrive at twilight. He is wrapped in a ribbon of gauze and wisdom. You wear a vest with one pocket still pinned shut. It feels right. The courtyard is bathed in pink lantern light. All around, the newly molted crayfish sit atop velvet pedestals, not as contestants, but as honored beings, glowing with tenderness and the shimmer of being briefly unarmored. A poet opens the ceremony with 3 words, "Thank you, Squishy." Everyone nods. There are no speeches, only gestures of reverence. Guests step forward to offer gifts to the soft-shelled. A petal, a drop of honey, a whispered memory. One young girl offers a lullaby she made up on the spot. Pince, though not newly molted, steps forward to present his own gift, a single page from his dream journal. The recipient, a tiny, translucent crayfish named Loon, accepts it with visible awe. You feel something stir behind your ribs. Not pride, something gentler. Perhaps belonging. As the evening winds down, everyone joins in the slowest waltz ever recorded, 3 steps per minute. Some fall asleep mid-turn. The stars are so close, you wonder if they're also watching, listening. And as Pince rests quietly in your palm, you know, truly know, that softness is not weakness. It is celebration. It is survival. It is the reason we're here, moving sideways toward each other in the moonlight.
Now, breathe a little slower. Let the air move in gently, like a ribbon unfurling in a bowl of calm. You've walked a long, looping path tonight, through lily-scented spas, libraries of silence, poetry written in claw strokes, and softly echoing chambers of thought. You've sat with stillness, laughed at ribboned duels, sipped tea next to a creature who says more in a twitch than most do in a paragraph. The night is deep now, and still. The kind of still that holds you without asking for anything. Outside your window, wherever that window may be, the stars are still blinking. The trees still creak gently like old storytellers. Maybe, somewhere nearby, something small is molting, becoming softer, becoming new. And maybe, so are you. There's no need to do anything now. No need to think or wonder or even remember where you left your socks. All you have to do is float, like a dream in a warm pond, like a memory that doesn't need a name. Let your breath settle into the rhythm of slow ripples. Let your thoughts drift, unhurried, like Pince on his pedal raft. Let your shell go quiet. Because here, in this curious sideways world, everything you are is already enough. And when you're ready, whether now or later, sleep will come. Softly, like a bow on a velvet leash, or a moon reflected in a teaspoon, or the sigh of a crustacean finally at rest. Good night.